Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy and I'm the host of the show this evening. Our show focuses on the process of selling real estate, either in an estate or in a conservatorship. After all the tangible personal property has been removed from the property, often the real estate under your control as an executor or conservator is in need of a number of repairs and improvements. But what should you do to maximize the sales price and get the property sold sooner rather than later? A good question, which our guest tonight will address, along with a host of other suggestions he encourages you to keep in mind when selling real estate. With me today is a real estate agent from the Chantilly Real Estate Office of Sampson Properties. He was raised in Northern Virginia and graduated from Virginia Tech. Over the ensuing 40 years since graduation, he has worked throughout Metro DC in all phases of real estate brokerage and property management, both as an investor personally, as the head of a real estate investment group, and as a realtor serving residential and commercial clients. Please welcome Realtor Roger Grooms. Roger, welcome.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. You know, we talk about, selling real estate, someone's in an estate, or trustee of a trust or conservator.
Sure.
So I think the first thing I wanted to address is to make sure they have, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, is they have to have the proper authority. So as an executor, you're going to have to go to court and get qualified so that you have the ability to sign a listing agreement and eventually sign the deed of closing. If you're a trustee of a trust, we've got to make sure that you're the proper successor and your trust has the necessary powers inside that trust agreement. And finally, if you're a conservator, you would have been appointed by the court to act in that capacity, and that court order would give you typically those powers necessary to deal with real estate, as we're going to talk about now. So with that by way of framework, and so that people understand that you just can't walk off and start dealing with this real estate until you've received the necessary powers. So let's talk about now, we've got those powers. We have a house, typically it's mom's house or dad's house. Tell me about the importance of a date of death appraisal.
Well, the home is largely, most people, it's their greatest asset. And so when you start to do a collection of assets or an inventory of assets, number one issue is, what is the house worth? So it's very important up front to get an appraisal, not only that, but to guide the family going forward.
Okay. Now certainly the date of death appraisal also helps us establish the tax basis, and people need to understand that the date of death value may not necessarily be the tax assessed value that you see in the county websites. So let's take the next step is, again, the importance of getting a realtor to do a market analysis. How does that come into play as we start towards trying to list this property and sell this property?
Well, obviously the very first thing is you have to do everything you can to determine the true value of a property. The appraisal is just one tool. And then the realtor will come and do a market analysis. So there are a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. We do a market analysis to determine what a real world price is for that property.
Okay. And of course that means that you want to make sure you can match up apples to apples. So if one house has a beautiful deck and great landscaping and your house does not, then we need to know that, because then you're not matching apples to apples. And I think that's what you're getting at.
And a number of other issues, sure.
So the next thing, of course, is important is we have this house, Dad's collected everything under Timbuktu, it's still in the house. We've got to get that house cleaned out, because that's the only way, as I understand it, that the realtor can really assess what really needs to be done here. And is that true?
Well, sometimes it's difficult to see beyond the clutter.
Sure.
And all the memorabilia. So that's the first step, is what do we do and who does it.
Okay. Let's continue with this, sort of begin to assess what we have. What is the importance of having a home inspection done by you as the seller before you even get ready to do anything to the property?
Well, that's really, Richard, that's really becoming in vogue to get your house pre-inspected. Therefore, you're in a stronger position actually as a seller. You know your product. You haven't lived there. You probably haven't lived there for maybe 30 or 40 years since you were a child. And the grandmom and granddad maybe have let the house go into disrepair. But you have to know what you have there.
Sure.
So it's a part of the evaluation process.
And that way you can anticipate those things and, again, correct those things so that you can take those as an issue, take those off the table when you get ready to sell the property.
Absolutely. Be a proactive seller.
Okay. All right, let's talk about, we've gotten the house cleared out. We've got kind of an idea about things that need to be done. Let's talk about repairs and improvements to the property. What does the typical buyer look for today in a home when they want to buy?
Well, that's really evolved over the course of the 4 decades, Richard. It used to be in the 1980s, for instance, it was plumbing and electrical. Then the home inspection became a wholesale inspection of the entire property. Now you might find, depending on the market, all real estate is local, depending on the briskness of the properties and how fast they're turning, people will, or an aggressive buyer agent maybe will attach the home inspection report to the contract, and that becomes an addendum to the contract. Fix these. But if in a more robust market where they have less leverage, those would be more negotiable.
Okay, so that we have to be prepared that the home inspection, the buyer is going to be looking for all these little details as identified by a professional.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
same professional that maybe similar professional that we would have hired on our own.
Right.
So let's talk about the importance now of assessing the homes the property will compete against when you get ready to go sell. Talk a little bit about that, would you please?
Sure, that's really important in doing the market analysis. If you're in a subdivision, it's a little easier. If you have unique properties, like some of the properties that I've listed, they're in a little more remote locations, it makes it harder. But if you're subdivision, what model is it? What square footage is it? What amenities is it? Are there any material defects to the property? Is it near power lines? Is it on a pipe stem? Is it on a main road? Even though it's the same model, and what improvements are in the property? So you really need to look at that objectively. That's really important, to look at those things objectively and analyze it from that perspective.
Okay. Let's turn to reviewing the property in light of what the buyer's looking for and what competing properties offer. We talked about that a little bit. But obviously we have to be, have a objective view that certain paint colors don't necessarily are not necessarily what everybody else wants. And you may think that that beautiful orange color in your dining room is quite in vogue, but the reality is that that's not going to go. So talk a little bit about, again, we've identified deficiencies. How do we get the work done, and how do we decide what work to get done in order to improve the property to make it really sellable?
Well, it's never been more important to get your professionals involved early, because the market evolves, it changes, and it depends on whether you're in Tyson's Corner or you're in Great Falls or you're Clifton. It depends on your individual market as to what that market's dictating and that market requires. What other colors? For instance, when I do a home, I have a decorator and a home stager. And the decorator will tell me what tiles are in this month, or what colors to use. So I listen to them. It may not be my taste, but I run with it. They're the professional.
Okay, and that's important advice.
Absolutely.
And so then, how do we figure out who's going to do the work? In other words, how do we pick out the people that do the tile work or the painting work and so on? Is that something that the homeowner takes care of, or is that something that the realtor can coordinate? Well,
the realtor certainly can suggest people, but the contract is between the homeowner, the seller, and the vendor.
Okay.
But we, as realtors, typically can suggest people maybe that we have used in the past with good success, but certainly they're not obligated to use our folks, but they're merely suggestions.
Okay.
But I can't emphasize enough on this point that get licensed individuals, get licensed contractors, licensed electrician, licensed plumber. Those issues will come up in the home inspection when the house is sold, and those licenses need to be ready and available.
Well, we've talked about identifying issues and fixing issues, but let's talk a little bit about the person that we're trying to sell to, the buyer, the mythical buyer today.
Right.
Is that person looking to do a fixer-upper nowadays, or do they want to be able to have it in walk-in showroom condition?
Well, it's a good point. There are a lot of people, of course, looking for turnkey, and that is predominant amount of the market. People are looking for turnkey solutions. They're looking for granite countertops. They're looking for a certain color scheme. They're looking for all these amenities. And quite frankly, that becomes a check-off list. And anything that's not on that check-off list becomes a dissatisfier. Okay. And you can expect maybe you're going to lose a certain percentage of those buyers. They're going to be disinterested because it doesn't have something on their list.
But by and large, though, as we look at this house that Dad left us, the things that people generally are going to focus on would be kitchen, bathrooms. What are those things they really focus on?
Yeah, the good old kitchen and bathroom, sure. The kitchen, obviously, number one. Does it have stainless steel appliances? Does it have granite countertops? Does it have new cabinets? What are the features of the cabinets? What's the layout of the kitchen? Is it an open kitchen? What walls can be removed or have been removed? The bathrooms updated? Those kinds of things. But they do look at the details.
Okay. So from a standpoint of we have, a list of 25 or 30 things to do, based upon the advice of professionals.
Right.
Should we have an unlimited budget, or is there some rationale as far as how much is too much to spend as far as making the property ready for sale?
Well, you don't want to overspend on the property, but you do want to get it up to a point where it's marketable, especially if it heirs. The heirs are all out of town, and everybody's situation is different. Everybody's unique. So how much a role will those heirs play? How much do they work? Are they retired? And how much time do they have? And what's the wherewithal of those folks? So it depends on their individual situation. It also depends on the individual market, what needs to be done. In some markets, you have to do it all, and then you'll command a good price.
Okay. So let's talk about, we've got the property in shape sufficient that we're happy with its condition compared to the houses it would compete against from prospective buyers. There's this concept you mentioned called staging the property. Okay, it's kind of a term of art, I think, within the real estate industry. What does that mean?
Well, people want to envision. They want to walk in. Now they want to walk into a property and they want to just fall in love with the property. And does this property meet all my needs? But is it? And staging becomes a part of that. I stage all my things now that I'm putting on the market.
So when you say stage, what does that mean?
Well, I have a professional stager.
And what do they do?
And the professional stager will come in and do a staging report. And we'll go over, I pay for the staging report. In the staging report, we go over all the items and the recommendations. Now, that the seller may or may not take all those recommendations, but the more recommendations that they take, the better off they typically are.
But the recommendations are, we have a house that's empty, it's been painted, it's been carpeted, whatever else we're going to do.
Right.
Now we need to we're talking about furniture and the various appointments that go around the house. Is that what we're talking about?
Right.
So they'll bring in different furniture to kind of make it fit and make it look great. Is that
right?
That's what we mean by staging.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand that. So the reason this is necessary is because it helps people kind of picture how their furniture or how their house would look if they moved in here.
Sure.
Is
my
that
dresser
right?
is about that size. My bed is about that size. That's where I would put my big chair. But aesthetically, they're looking for that. Even they like the staging in one house versus the second house. I've certainly seen that. I've seen them choose one house over another house just because of the staging.
Now, I know you've mentioned it sometimes they even want to buy the furniture that's in there first.
Oh, I've had that, sure. They want to buy my furniture. Absolutely.
So it all was put together nicely. So you make all these arrangements to get the report and the recommendations, then you go to the homeowner and talk with them, and then we figure out what they're willing to do, and from there, a plan is adopted. And of course, there is a cost for staging, which again, that's related to what we need and how long you're going to need it.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the staging furniture is paid for by the seller.
Okay.
We, as in my business,
Well, they basically rent the furniture.
They rent the furniture, correct.
For a month or 2 months or.
Typically, you'll find most of the services are cost-effective on a 90-day contract.
90-day contract. Okay. Okay. All right. So we got the property staged. We're ready to go ahead and put on the market. Let's talk about presenting the property to the public, because no one knows it's really for sale yet, right? And we're going to list the property, and so when is a for sale sign typically put in the front yard?
When the listing is activated.
Okay, so until we're active, and that in listing you mean that's MLS, or is that the correct terminology?
It's the MRIS now.
MRIS.
The former MLS, yes.
I'm sure.
For those of us that have been in it for a century, since the last century, yes, that's correct, MLS.
And so the listing is maybe it's put in MRIS, but it's not active until we're ready to go. At that point, the sign goes in the front.
The sign will go up, or we could have a coming soon sign, and then we could post prior to the activation of the listing.
Okay. All right, we've done all this work for the purpose of trying to get the best price for the property, but then that means we have to figure out what are we going to list it for sale for. Are there any challenges in coming to an agreement about what to list the property for sale for?
Major challenges.
So,
Major challenges. Who determines the price?
Right.
What is it worth? When I look at it and I do an analysis of a property based on amenities, square footage, I give my folks my recommendation, and I wholeheartedly encourage them to accept my recommendation. And when I do the analysis of the property, I've done it. I've looked at everything on the market. I've either been in it or looked at it online. I've looked at all the amenities, and I've looked at the days on market, and I've looked at what's under contract, what's active, what's falling out. So I know that individual marketplace. Really got my finger on it. So when I make a recommendation, it's with a lot of thought that we come up with that price.
So the realtor that's hired by the estate to eventually go ahead and list this property for sale and sell it, they bring that experience to bear. If we overprice the property, then the number of days that it's sitting in MRIS starts to get higher. Does that mean anything to the other realtors?
It is a listing killer.
It is.
It is the worst possible thing you can do is overprice your property. Statistically, you're going to get, if you overprice your property, you're going to get less, not more, than you originally gotten. All these are NAR statistics, but
interesting.
And typically, and according to the NAR, 92% of the homes are co-opt, which means that there's another broker involved. You're the listing broker, and you have a selling broker. So you're going to have to be dealing with another agent. You're going to have to be dealing with a buyer agent, and they're going to have a home inspection. So you need to kind of plan ahead and be thinking through that process with your realtor.
And that realtor, the buying realtor, is going to be an informed person. So they're going to recognize it's missing this, it's missing that.
Right.
And so those are all going to be negatives when they go back and consult with their buyer after they've looked at the property. So
most certainly.
So we get to that point. Listing price is important. We want to make sure we get it listed correctly for a price that's within reason. Okay. We like to get $1 million, but if all the houses are selling for $300,000 in your neighborhood, then we have to be realistic. It's just not. You don't waste. It's just never going to sell.
Right.
And
there is the issue of emotional attachment.
Sure.
It's mom and dad's house, so we think it's worth X, and they put a lot of time and effort, and there's a lot of emotion involved in it. And dad did this, and dad loved this, and we can't sell it for this. So you have to become. It's part of the process. Is you have to become dispassionate about it. It has to be an objective business decision. So again, listen to your realtor.
That's what the realtor does. What are some of the, when we get an offer, frequently there are concessions, what they call concessions, or adjustments that are in favor of the buyer that the seller gives. Okay, tell me what are some of the common seller concessions to the buyer that we see in the marketplace today?
Well, the laundry list of home inspection items is ad infinitum. It just goes on and on. The concessions would be, to a point I made earlier, depending on the market and how fluid the market is. And the days on market drives everything. If it's been on the market 5 days, and if everything's fluid in that individual market and it's selling within 5 to 10 days, you're going to have to do less. If if that individual marketplace, and I've seen some where there's a longer sell cycle and it's 37 days, well, you're going to have to be, the seller's going to have to be more flexible in what he'll do. He may not have to do those individual items, but he may have to do an assessment of what the value of those items, and then give a concession to the buyer.
So in other words, we might have the property listed for $200,000, and maybe we have to give a seller concession of $5,000 that they can use at closing against their other closing costs. Is that what you're talking about?
Certainly.
Now, a lot of times in the seller concession mode, do people buy warranties to cover the appliances and everything that's in the house? Is that pretty common?
I encourage my folks always to buy a home warranty.
Okay.
And the home warranty will cover actually during the listing phase as well. So.
That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we covered a lot of material. I want to leave plenty of time because you've been doing this for 40 years. So.
Don't remind me.
Yeah. Is all the things we talked about, today, are all these really necessary just to sell mom's house?
They are. They are. You could obviously sell it as is, and just with the furniture and everything else in it. The price points in terms of variances. If I had to give somebody a rule of thumb number, it's going to be about 30% off of what they would get.
If they don't do any of the improvements and so on,
they can expect about a 70% of market, which is a lot of what the rehabbers work off of, the kind of margin they work off of.
Okay. Okay. And finally, can you share with our viewers some of the lessons you've learned over the years, sometimes the hard way, in the course of selling residential real estate? Things to do or not to do?
There are a lot of things they shouldn't do, but the number one thing is I encourage everybody out there that's interested in selling their property, don't overprice your property. Because every realtor, the first thing they do is when they look at your listing, is they scroll down and look at the date, it's DOM, days on market. They want to determine the flexibility of the seller. They want to know how many people have been through it. They want to know why it hasn't sold. Mm-hmm. If it ages out too much. And that's going to be reflective in what offer you get. Mm-hmm. And a lot of folks, for instance, if it's on the market for, say, 60 days, 90 days, well, geez, let's just get a new realtor. Maybe it's that realtor just not moving it. The fact is, that carries with them. People can see, other realtors see that it's been on the market 90 days, and there's a reason for it. And it's obviously price condition. So the market will determine the value, price, condition.
So again, if we're matching up in our neighborhoods, and even if it's in a subdivision, if you have someone with a brand new kitchen and mm-hmm. someone who has a kitchen that's 20 years old, you mm-hmm. can't expect to be getting the same price that they're getting. If your basement's not finished and their basement is finished, so these are the apples to apples comparison that we have to be carefully done. Mm-hmm. Which all goes to how you price it and then how fast you're able to dispose of the property.
Right. Yeah. People pass on those properties readily.
Well, Roger, I got to thank you so very, very much for coming by and visiting with us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been so much fun having you on the show, and thanks for sharing all this great information and for this great public service that you're doing for the folks of Northern Virginia.
Happy to.
Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
Selling real estate, whether in an estate or being managed in a conservatorship, presents a host of challenges if you want to maximize the sales price and not be left holding and maintaining a property for months on end. Our guest tonight shined a light on things to do and not to do as you undertake this task. What I take away from the discussion, however, is that it is critical to make sure you spend the right amount of money on improvements and repairs that are necessary and will serve to enhance the value of the property. But more importantly, how you present the property to prospective buyers and how you price it go a long way to getting the property sold in a timely manner for a good price. We strongly recommend to executors and conservators that all this is best accomplished with the advice and guidance of a good realtor. This concludes our show this evening. We hope you found it informative. Replays of this show and all shows to date, along with other helpful information, are available on the Probate Nation website. We encourage you to take advantage of this public service resource. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.